The September morning air hung heavy with the weight of history as the great and the good of the nation filed into Westminster Abbey. The passing of Queen Elizabeth II, the only sovereign most Britons had ever known, had plunged the country into a profound and solemn grief. For the royal family, the grief was personal. A chasm opened in the very heart of their existence. And for a 7-year-old girl named Charlotte, it was a day of bewildering ritual, starched clothing, and the overwhelming sadness of saying goodbye to her beloved Gon. The young princess, the daughter of the Prince and Princess of Wales, walked with a poise that belied her years. Dressed in a somber black coat, her long hair neatly pinned back, she held the hand of her mother, Catherine. Beside her walked her older brother, George, the future king, his young face a mask of grave concentration. They were the symbols of a future dawn, walking through the darkest twilight of an era. And among the procession of royals, one figure watched the children with an intensity that was difficult to read. Queen Camilla, now the king's wife and the queen consort, moved with the practiced authority of her new station. The family took their places, the weight of 1 billion global stares pressing down upon them through the lenses of countless cameras. As the ancient service droned on, a moment of pure, unscripted childhood occurred. For young George and Charlotte, at the solemnity was a heavy cloak, whether from boredom, fidgeting, or the simple sibling rivalry that exists in every family. A small squabble broke out. According to reports from lip readers present, George was seen to pinch his sister. Charlotte, reacting with the instinct of any 7-year-old, let out a small cry of "ow" and turned to face her brother. It was a tiny, human moment. But in the gilded cage of monarchy, there are no small moments. From her position, the Queen Camilla noticed the disruption. Her reaction was swift and, to those who saw it, severe. Lip-reading experts later analyzed the footage, revealing that Camilla did not simply offer a gentle look of reproach. Instead, she gestured sternly towards Charlotte. Her words, directed at Catherine, the Princess of Wales, were a clipped and commanding, "Take her." The command hung in the air like a physical blow. Catherine, known for her own impeccable composure, leaned in to tend to her daughter, her face a careful blank. But for young Charlotte, the moment was already scarred. The sharpness of her step-grandmother's tone, the public nature of the rebuke, was too much. The little girl, who had been the picture of royal dignity, was seen later with her head in her hands, her small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The image of Charlotte, comforted by her mother, was a stark contrast to the cold efficiency of the command that had preceded it. For those watching closely, it was a first glimpse at a hidden dynamic. This was not a moment of gentle, grandmotherly guidance. It felt, to many observers, like a deliberate assertion of power. It was a public correction, a reminder of who was now in charge. And its target was not just a fidgeting child, but the way in which the future of the monarchy, George, Charlotte, and their mother, was being presented to the world. The cold September air had just gotten a little colder, and in the months that followed the Queen's funeral, the royal family attempted to project an image of unity and a smooth transition into the Carolean era. Public appearances were carefully curated, with the younger generation, particularly the children of the Prince and Princess of Wales, taking on increasingly prominent roles. They were the human face of the monarchy, the bridge to the future. Yet, beneath the surface of coordinated waves and smiling photographs, the fault lines exposed at the funeral continued to deepen. It was during the grand spectacle of the king's coronation in May 2023 that another telling incident occurred, one that the world would later revisit with a knowing eye. The coronation weekend was a marathon of tradition for the Wales children. After the historic ceremony in the Abbey, a star-studded coronation concert was held at Windsor Castle. It was a long, dazzling, and undoubtedly exhausting day for an 8-year-old. As the king and queen consort entered the royal box at the concert, protocol dictated a display of respect. The family members present were to offer bows and curtsies to the newly crowned monarch and his wife. Little Charlotte, ever the diligent student of royal etiquette, the same girl who had famously reminded her brother George at the late Queen's funeral that he need to bow, saw her grandfather, the king, and immediately dipped into a perfect, graceful curtsy. But in her eagerness to honor the king, she had turned her body away from Camilla. Her back was now to her step-grandmother, and she had inadvertently omitted the curtsy for the queen consort. For a split second, the tableau was frozen. Charlotte, mid-curtsy to the king, and Camilla, standing just behind her, waiting for a gesture of deference that was not coming. It was the kind of mistake any tired child could make. The palace of etiquette had a single door, and Charlotte, in her focus, had chosen the wrong one. What happened next was crucial. Camilla, with millions watching, reached out and placed a hand on Charlotte's shoulder. The gesture could be interpreted in two entirely different ways. To the official narrative and to the royal rota reporters eager to smooth over any discord, it was a moment of gentle, grandmotherly reassurance. Camilla was easing the child's embarrassment, prompting her to smile, and subtly guiding her through a tricky social situation. And it was framed as evidence of a warm, if new, relationship. But to those who remembered the cold command of "take her" at the funeral, Camilla's touch carried a different weight. It was a correction, a public reminder that Charlotte's deference was owed to her as much as to the king. The gentle hand on the shoulder could be seen as a firm, albeit silk-gloved, redirection. Yea, it was a masterclass in plausible deniability, an act that could be read as kindness by the masses but understood as a quiet assertion of hierarchy by those in the know. Charlotte, for her part, smiled back, the moment passing in a blur of flashing lights. Later, she would be seen asking her mother for help adjusting a wristband, a simple childish request that grounded her once more in reality, far from the complex currents of adult power plays. And the coronation itself had provided an even more significant piece of evidence regarding Camilla's priorities and her vision for the royal family's future. In a break with centuries of tradition, Queen Camilla made a decision regarding the ancient ceremony of the gold state coach and the royal children who would participate. For the procession, she ensured that her own grandchildren from her previous marriage, her sons, Tom and Laura's children, were given prominent roles. And they were chosen to hold the canopy of state, a highly visible and honorific position. In contrast, the Wales children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, were relegated to the role of spectators, seated with their parents among the congregation. While their presence was noted, their function was passive. They were there to watch history, not to actively participate in making it. To the public, this might have seemed a minor detail, a logistical decision. But within the insular world of the palace, it was a seismic statement. For decades, the natural order of such events had been to place the direct heirs and their children at the ceremonial heart of the monarchy. By elevating her own grandchildren, Camilla was drawing a clear line in the sand. She was signaling that her family, the children of her blood, were now integral parts of the royal firmament, entitled to privileges and positions that were, by tradition, reserved for the direct line of succession. It was a move that many interpreted as a long-term strategy of family building, not of uniting the two halves of the king's family, but of establishing her own branch's precedence and permanence. The message to the Waleses and to the world was subtle but unmistakable. Camilla's influence would be used to elevate her own, even if it meant diminishing the roles of William and Catherine's children. The contrast in Camilla's public demeanor towards the two sets of children became a topic of hushed speculation among palace insiders and body language experts. Observers noted that while Camilla could appear stiff or formal with George and Charlotte, Her interactions with her own grandchildren were marked by an easy, unguarded warmth. At public events, she would be seen leaning in to speak with them, her face softening, her posture relaxing. With the Wales children, and there was a noticeable distance, a formality that never quite thawed. This wasn't the distant respect of a step-grandparent who was still finding her feet. It was the calculated reserve of a political player. For Camilla, the Wales children were not just children. They were symbols. George was the future king, a constant living reminder of the dynasty she had married into but would never truly belong to. Charlotte, with her uncanny resemblance to the late Queen and her mother, Diana, was a beloved figure whose popularity threatened to eclipse all others. Their very existence was a powerful counter-narrative to the story Camilla had spent decades trying to write for herself. In the polished halls of Buckingham Palace, love and power were currencies that rarely mixed, and Camilla was playing a long game for the latter. While the tensions simmered in the background, the royal machine required a constant churn of public engagements. The annual Trooping the Color Parade, on a pageant of military precision and family unity, was one such occasion. In 2022, it offered a brief, charming respite from the darker narratives. On the way to the event, a royal carriage carried the Duchess of Cornwall, as she was then, Catherine, and the 3 Cambridge children. As the open-top carriage processed down the mall, lined with thousands of cheering well-wishers, a delightful scene unfolded. Young Princess Charlotte, her face pressed to the window, became utterly captivated. And her attention was not on the crowds, but on the spectacle of the parade itself. Her eyes were fixed, wide with wonder, on the royal guards, the immaculate soldiers in their bearskin hats and scarlet tunics, riding on horseback or marching in perfect formation. Social media, ever alert for a heartwarming moment, lit up with comments about the transfixed princess. It was a pure, unvarnished moment of childhood curiosity. For a few minutes, she wasn't a princess burdened by the weight of a 1,000-year-old institution. She was just a little girl, utterly absorbed by the pageantry passing before her eyes. Her brothers, George and Louis, were also spotted enthusiastically waving at the crowds, but it was Charlotte's quiet, intense focus that captured the public's imagination. This moment was significant for another reason. It showcased the very different public perception of Charlotte and her siblings versus the other members of the carriage. Camilla, seated nearby, was performing the role of the gracious senior royal, but the world's eyes were on the children. The Twitter frenzy, sparked by Charlotte's fascination, was a potent reminder of where the future of the monarchy's popularity truly lay. The children, especially Charlotte, were not just participants. They were the stars. They were the ones who humanized the monarchy, who drew affection and adoration from a public that could often be skeptical of the institution. This natural, unforced popularity was a form of power that no amount of ceremony could manufacture. And it was this very power, wielded effortlessly by a child, that was the ultimate source of the quiet, persistent tension within the family. Charlotte, by simply being herself, was a threat to the carefully managed narrative of the new king and queen's court. As the years passed, the dynamic established in the early days of the new reign only solidified. The young princess grew, her confidence and poise increasing with each public appearance. She became a fixture at major state occasions, from the balcony at Trooping the Color to the somber rows of remembrance events. She learned the rhythms of royal life, the waving, the walking, the careful neutrality of expression. And she learned to be seen and not heard, to be a symbol first and a child second. But the weight of that scrutiny, the knowledge that her every move was dissected and debated by millions, was a burden few could imagine. The internet, a force for both connection and cruelty, held up a magnifying glass to her life. She was too young to understand the complex reasons behind it, but she was old enough to feel its effects. This intense focus was starkly illustrated in the summer of 2025,